Hi guys. I've never done this before and the setup is far from ideal, so there may be background noises. You can probably see our laundry, and I'm probably going to curse at least a couple dozen times, I'm assuming. Partly because our setup currently is this tree in a jar that is frequently poking me in the neck. So this is the often mentioned mixed media agricultural art journal / planner. And originally it started, you can see this is a work in constant progress. This is not staying on. I'm still looking for something that's going to keep anything on this canvas-y cover. It started because this was a full planner in a Staples clearance bin for $1. And what drew me to it specifically is that it has these full year pages that are just the days in a list format, which is really useful for marking things like planting dates, starting dates, ranges where you're not exactly sure when something's going to happen, but based on the weather, it's probably going to be there. A calendar, a typical month-by-month calendar planner is not always the best for this because you can't sort of broadcast. You can only see what's going on in your month. I have a very hard time keeping things in mind that are not immediately in front of me, so I had, for a couple of years, gotten a local school's garden-themed calendar. And the issue is that if it was happening the next month, I seem to have complete lack of awareness of it until I turn the page, which frequently can cause problems when you need to be ready for things like supplies when you're starting, 30 seeds or something, and you don't have trays or the seed starting medium. So this really caught my attention. It actually has two of them. It has one that was meant for 2016, which is why this was so cheap, and another that's meant for 2017 back here. Oh, the weather tab, which I'm going to be using to mark the temperatures, so that instead of kind of going by what the 7 different sites tell me on the internet should be the temperature range, which gives me 7 different answers, I can start recording and seeing for myself what happens in my own microclimate. I really recommend doing that. It actually started because I read this great article, or skimmed this great article, and I think it was Modern Farmer, specifically about beekeeping based on the same kind of temperature and blooming marks that a lot of people use for plant-based agriculture. So things like timing your hive inspections by either a temperature or when the pussy willows come up, things like that. So knowing that kind of information is going to be so important when I do have my bees, which we did get. I was very, very gratefully gifted by my family the starting nuke, which is a 5-frame box of bees from actually my super social activist queer mentor beekeeper. So I literally could not think of a cooler way to get bees than that. Anyway, so that's why having this information for yourself, for your own reference, can be helpful, especially with changing climates when we're basing a temperature range on the last decade, but temperatures have been drastically changing for the last, say, 5 years. I don't know the exact. So that's what this is. So that's why I purchased this. Originally, I actually had some other decoration glued on here, and that came off too. So eventually I'll find something that stays on the cover. But this is just to show that you really can use anything. You can use a marble notebook. You could bind a book yourself out of print-offs you didn't need or old newspapers. Anything that works for you to keep track of what's going on. Originally, when I started with this, apparently I'm standing up now. I was sitting on the stool. I said, no idea what I'm doing. But the original format for this, the original notes, basically anything that's in pencil directly on the page was how this started. So again, I knew right away that I was going to be using this. So this is right on the page. I have other pieces here that are, this fell out again, that are right on the page. At one point, I was actually using it just like a brain dump notebook for figuring out what it is I needed to do next. And part of that is because, again, the way that my brain works, I frequently need to make lists several times before I can put them in the order that I need them, which is part of why this works so well. I have multiple notebooks that I make these drafts in. As you can see, things are pasted in here. I have cards that I used specifically for knowing what plants needed to be planted when, as a, whoops, that's a sort of shortcut. This is going well. And I specifically have this set up this way. Things go out sooner than others, even though they're started inside at the same time. So I have a different list for indoor starts that don't go out until it's warm versus indoor starts that actually go out when it's still cold out. And again, part of this is to keep me from wasting paper and making a million lists and then having to get rid of those sheets. But I also found that when I did finally hit the final list, instead of copying it over, which let me tell you gets really exhausting when you had to do it 6 or 7 times already, the other thing I found myself doing is actually just pasting lists in, which is, I'm trying to find the, here we go. So this is a long form list of the different seeds that would be started when. And you can get as simple or complicated as you want. I ended up using doodles just to differentiate one list from the other. And these were sort of the second to last draft that led to these cards here that I thought I'd be using more of, but actually didn't need once I got another list together, which would be farther along in here. I actually have a very detailed, and again, this is one of these things where you create a bunch of drafts and then find, this is formatting. I use these here to let me know where things are, because whenever I have multiple pages, I have a very hard time finding things because I can't really skim and maintain that information that quickly. Here it is. Nope, that's not it either. But somewhere in here is a very, there we go. I ended up making a very detailed list of how many I would need of each plant to be starting so that I know exactly how many pots or how much medium I'd need. This back section of the book is actually dedicated to being essentially a calendar. I've got each month here from those garden calendars, including pieces of information that came from them that were just part of why I had them in the first place, was all these tips as I was learning. And this way I have a really clear plan of what has to get done for every month, including these to-do lists that are going to be filled in as we get closer. So right now, the to-do lists for these were very slim. I know I still need to add some more for March, depending on when the weather allows. But it's how I can have my farm chores and my planting, and at some point the bees. All of these different categories of to-dos can end up in the same place, but still be differentiated, which is something that my brain needs. So yeah. Originally, we were just using this to sort of take notes. Things are kind of scattered in random places. And the way that I ended up sorting that is to actually end up dividing things by month. So February, in what this would have been as a planner, is completely set aside for bees. Whether that's original stats, I have cutouts here of the, I think this might be from Dodont, hive inspection checklist. I can get specific information on that later. This specifically, this version, whoops, is from the Puget Sound Beekeepers Association. And it does look to be based on either the Dedant or the Brushy Mountain list for free. It's a really great resource. It keeps me in line on knowing exactly what I'm looking for when I'm in there. So we're going to see if having this actually out and sitting there instead of trying to go through it in my head is going to work. I don't know if I can do that multitasking, but this year we're going to try. And then in order to get everything continually organized, after the fact, I use stickers or other patterns to go back and label what things mean. So, you know, we have these edges here. That one's not in the, there we go. So this is an easy visual. A lot of people in bullet journals, etc., will have indexes or a table of contents. This table of contents lets me be as fluid as I need to be, having this visual on the edge, and makes it easier for me to find it because that's just how my brain works best. And in the very end, I will eventually, at the very end of the season, when I'm going through all of my information, I will be putting something, whoops, no, that was in there, something back here that's essentially an index, so that if I need to find, for example, specific statistics on produce and how much one plant gave, I can know where in here, after the fact, I'll find it. The other thing that made this become, this is a seed inventory, become an essential tool was actually just keeping my brain busy by doing things like collage. So when I couldn't use enough brain power to really start going through and making lists, I could flip through garden catalogs and just start cutting out pictures, thinking, you know, I used to be an educator, so thinking in terms of even like early elementary learning. How do you help kids understand what words start with C? Well, you think about the sound, and then you have them go through and make collages of words that start with the K sound. And then, you know, if you're not sure if it's a C or a K, because that was a terrible example, you can find out. But let's try D. Okay, so you go through magazine, and you pick out anything that starts with the D sound. And then you have a collage from your kiddos of all the words that start with D. So they might not know how to spell things yet or even really write, but they can look at their page and say, oh, this is a dog. It starts with D. This is a diary. It starts with D. I'm losing words that start with D, but like that. And sometimes going back to those very sort of early childhood learning skill roots are what help my brain best absorb and categorize information. So this just started as something to do when I had nothing else that I could do. You can cut out and glue down and feel like you really did a lot of work because you have something immediately to show for it. And also, I am an artist and I miss art. And sometimes I don't have enough in me to draw from scratch. But this lets me create something without having to start all the elements by myself. So at one point, I was literally just going through and using blank pages to make collages. And as you can see, some of those collages ended up being a useful part of that. For example, doing the home beds or making note of what needs to be started in the spring earliest versus, you know, some of this is just here. There's not actually a purpose for it. It just, you know, was something that was fun to do and looks pretty, and honestly keeps in mind my goals for what I'm working for in the future. Am I going to be having chickens or donkeys this year or anytime in the next few years? No, but it feels good to be able to look at this and go, eventually I'm gonna get here. And it keeps me busy. You don't have to have a reason to make art. That's something I have to keep being reminded of, even though I preach that to other people. So a lot of these pages are kind of just random, but they can be as random as I need or want because I have that visual system here, because it takes 5 seconds to put something at the edge of a page to tell you what you're looking at. I think the best example here, my battery is running low, this is bad timing. The best example that I have here is the maps. you have to make a lot of maps. I actually have a tab up calling 6 maps to draw for your permaculture homestead. And between that and the number of drafts I make to get anything done, you end up with so many diagrams and maps. So, for example, here I have a very rough sketch of the full land and pieces labeled. None of this is to dimensions. That has to happen this month when I can actually get onto the land again. But I actually use that for reference later, and it's easy to find where I am using or referencing it because it has these edges. So here I've broken down smaller areas of beds that needed more detail than that space. Here again, I've got another level of detail. So it lets you can do as many drafts as you need. You can do as much or as little detail as you need, and you can revisit things as much as you need when you can just sort of stick things in at random and still find your place. Which is something that I'm finding actually works much better for me for something that's in progress perpetually than, say, something that's set up by date where, well, you know, shit, I forgot that I needed to do something in March, and now I've made that entire month already, or there's no space to fit it in. So sometimes completely freestyle works best for something where you're going to have to come back and change or revisit. So we've got our different maps. I have a seed inventory, which I actually made on other paper and pasted in to get an idea of what I even had to work with. And then I was able to reorganize that later into exactly what I would be planting of each plant to feed us. And then that references back to the original diagram to know where things are going to go. There's a list for that. I apologize if this gives out while I'm explaining. Here we go. So there's a lot to be said for going freestyle on these things. And it's however it works for you is the way to go. It doesn't have to look like anyone else's. It's our calendar that goes into our monthly. And this is literally just wish lists, things I really want later. It's a really good idea to have somewhere to jot down, hey, I saw this cultivar and it sounded really interesting. Let's try it next year. And that, and you know, in the middle of January when everything snowed in, it's kind of nice.